Hello, today we're going to be talking about top commons for the new set, Neon Dynasty, and then we're also going to look at those commons in relation to where they're being drafted and potentially identify some cards that are being drafted too late or too early. So we're going to look at about 12 commons and try and see how they're playing out in games, why they may be doing as well as they're doing, and maybe recognize some commons that aren't in these top 12 or so. So first off, just a little bit of orientation. We're using 17 lands, and in particular, we're going to look at game in hand win rate, and then a little bit on improvement when drawn, and a little bit on opening hand win rate as we kind of look through these. For those who are maybe a little less familiar or just want a quick refresher, opening hand win rate says looking at your opening hand of 7 cards or how many cards you end up keeping if you've mulliganed, and if that card is in your opening hand, do you win the game or not? So as an example, Okiba Reckoner Raid, a Saga for just black, if it's in your opening hand, and this isn't considering player draw, which would affect this, looking at a 65% win rate, so almost 2 out of every 3 games. However, if you just draw it at any point, so that's your game in hand, it drops a little bit, which kind of makes sense. A 1-mana play that really can get everything started with generating some value, getting a creature that can start doing some work in a couple turns would make sense to be very good in your opening hand, but can still be good later in the game. The life drain, the ability to maybe get a menace creature in can be very useful. And then improvement when drawn, the thought there is if the card is in your deck but you did not draw it, so game is not drawn, for example, what was the win rate of your deck? And then when you did draw the card, so like game in hand, how well did your deck do? And ideally, you'd see cards that are showing an improvement when drawn. A thought here that you do have to consider is those cards that are maybe leaning towards being aggressive or being played in generally aggressive decks may have an improvement withdrawn that is a little different compared to those that are like in a controlling deck, because controlling decks are going to see more cards, so you may have these game in hand win rates that are going up a little bit, improvement when drawns. Whereas aggressive decks, you may see the opposite. So it's not; these aren't the end all be all, but they do provide a good perspective for cards when considered kind of together. And then we will look at the average last CNET, which is in a pack of cards that you're drafting. When somebody that is drafting and has 17 lands installed last saw the card and either picked it or didn't pick it. We'll look at this in a little more detail when we look at our second tab and compare these win rates with average last CNET to maybe identify some cards that could be drafted a little earlier or maybe should be drafted a little later. So first off, Okiba Reckoner Raid. It's our cool rat jacket card for just a black. First 2 steps just drains 1, gain 1, and then when you exile it, it comes back as a 2/2 menace. It seems like it wouldn't be exceptionally strong when you're thinking, oh, just 1 life here and there and a 2/2 creature, but we've seen cards like an AFR. We saw the vampire spawn that drained 2 and came in as a 2/3. We even saw some cards in other sets that were draining, like Diregraph Scavenger, and Vow that was draining 2, that also had some graveyard anti-synergies and that Death Touch, but those cards cost 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 mana. This costs a single black mana, very easy to fit in your curve almost anywhere. And then because we have cards that can bring creatures to hand, when we're talking about like our ninjutsu or enchantments to hand, potentially when we're talking about like a geothermal Kami, there's tons of ways that you can maybe replay this card and get the drain, for more than just 2 in a game. So leading out, this can be a super strong play, even for your value decks, which most of these decks are tempo and value oriented. In blue-black and in black-green, for sure, it's likely not quite as strong in black-red, as those tend to have a more artifact-based strategy. And then in white-black, you can play artifact and enchantment-based. so it does tend to be good in that deck as well. So it's a card that it's definitely worth first picking, but at this point we are seeing, average last seen at is around pick 5. So some people are seeing this pretty late. Some people are probably even seeing this wheel in packs that maybe have a black rare and a black uncommon, or another black common that maybe just is picked over it for whatever reason. So that's a Keeper Reckoner Raid, a card I'm happy to have, as many as I can in deck. I'll play 4, 5, 6 of these if I get them. And it does have a good improvement when drawn. Anything really above, 3 to 4% is something really worth looking at. But something that does need to be considered is if these cards being played in decks that are just performing well, all of those game in hand wins rates and improvement when drawns can go up, but in particular the game in hand win rate and game drawn win rate goes up. But IWD is oftentimes a way to identify if a card is just in a deck with other good cards. So we'll see, for example, I do think that Season of Renewal can be a very good card. I've played it very effectively in certain decks, but this high win rate is maybe somewhat indicative of the other cards around it, because there's only a small improvement when drawn of 1.4 percentage points. So that's 58.7 to 57.3, 1.4%. Where some of these other cards, 8%, 6%, 9%, 7%. So just something to keep in mind when you're evaluating cards. So we're going to see a lot of black, blue, and white cards, and then some green as we kind of finish up the list. So Network Disruptor, we're going to see a theme here. Very cheap cards that can do multiple, play on multiple planes, multiple axes. So Network Disruptor, for single blue, you get a 1/1 flyer. So you can drop this on turn 1 and maybe set up a ninjutsu on turn 2. Maybe you can just, set up some plays where you're being a little more aggressive, getting some points of damage before the opponent can stabilize. And then ideally, you could find a way to bring this back to your hand from some ninjutsu card. So you can play it again to tap an opponent's key blocker to get in with another ninjutsu creature, or tap a flyer so you can get in with some other flyers, or just make a good alpha attack, maybe with some menace creatures like your Keeper Raid Reckoner that's been flipped over to Izumi Road Captain. So one note here that's kind of been identified by others, Sirkovitz, Two Duck Cube Carl, other people, is these win rates are somewhat inflated, because when you do pick the card up from like a ninjutsu and then play it back down, it's seen as being played again. So this probably it looked like about 2 to 3%, a little higher than would be expected, because if you're doing those in games, you're likely to win those games. So our win rates are probably closer to like 60, 61%, and this print when drawn is probably closer to like 7%, which is still right up there with Keeper Raid Reckoner and our next cards, Virus Beetle and Imperial Oath. But the really nice thing here is, if you don't draw this in your opening hand, where it can be very good, 60%, you can still play it later to clear out blockers for better attacks or for an alpha, like I said. So it's useful at any point in the game. And then you still get artifact synergies. There's so many cards that care about artifacts, either make a card cheaper, or to give you like a benefit if you have an artifact and enchantment in play. So Network Disruptor, big overperformer. Improvement when drawn of, really is probably 7%. Okay, Virus Beetle, this looks so innocuous. We've seen Ravenous Rats multiple times over, 1 in a black for a 1/1, opponent discards the card. And the reason that this is probably overperforming are threefold. One, this is such a value-oriented draft format, so if you can generate some tempo advantage, generate some value, you can just bury your opponent before they really can even get into the game. So even if you're on the draw, this is useful to get a card out of your opponent's hand, because they haven't drawn a card because they were in the play first. But also, if you're on the play, you can drop this on turn 2 and then either clear out a blocker with like a Network Disruptor, or they just don't have a play on 2, and you can swing in with this and bring this back to your hand and then replay it on 3 or 4. You've already netted 2 cards from them. So it's huge for generating value. It only costs 2 mana, so you can get it out early. And if you need to, block with it, trade, threaten trading, or threaten, attacking back at the opponent, plays on so many different axes there. But also, it's an artifact. So, like our Ravenous Rats of the past, didn't have a synergy that said, hey, I want more artifacts in my deck so that I can get some extra bonus or benefit from other cards. So, cheap creature, helps with value and card advantage, and is an artifact. Can be ninjutsu back to the hand. It's playing super well for all those reasons. And you're seeing opening hand win rate very strong, and then game and hand win rate very strong as well. Some of this is also getting bounced back to hand like Network Disruptor. So these are probably closer to 60, 61%. As Prudent when drawn, it's maybe more like 5 to 6%, which is still very good. So this is going to be our most expensive card by mana value. But the super nice thing is for Imperial Oath, you can either ramp to it a little bit in green, or you can splash it, in really any color pair. And this card is saying, stabilize the board. 3 2/2s, can block multiple creatures, set up double or triple blocks if you need to. And if you can, potentially have favorable attacks, they've got Vigilance, which just makes racing so tough for the opponent. And then Scry 3 says, I'm going to draw much better cards than you on average, over the next, 1 to 3 turns. You can either say, I just cast this on 6, I don't need more lands, and I reveal 2 or 3 lands off top, get rid of those, or, I've only got 2 or 3 cards left in hand when I cast this, I'm looking for more gas, keep some good cards that help you maybe double spell, or maybe another Imperial Oath, just Oath into Oath into Oath, just chain them. Scry 3 is just huge for helping you pull ahead of your opponent after you've caught up. If you were behind, or if you were already ahead and you played this, just staying ahead and not giving your opponent a chance to really breathe there. The silly thing here is this was being seen, on average at pick like 9, 10, 11. Average last seen at, and average taken at. Now it's already dropped down to 7.16, so we're on pick 7, which is a testament of people recognizing this is a very good card. As you would imagine, the opening hand win rate is not as good as this game drawn win rate, which does help you realize that, maybe I can't put, 4 Imperial Oaths in my deck, unless that's my only real top end. And then maybe you can, because you'd hate to see 2 of these in your opening hand, but if the rest of your deck is, 1, 2, 3 drops, Spirited Companion, for example, in white, if you're not splashing, you could probably get away with that. Also, this has been played a lot less. You're saying game in hand, 9,000 compared to, 22, 28, 25,000. So people may be speculating on this and not playing it or not splashing it. People may just not realize it's a good card and they aren't playing it, but that is a number that definitely stands out, in particular because of this very large game in hand win rate, when drawn. So this is a card it's being seen a lot, but isn't being played as much. So if you have a chance and it's something you can play towards, it can be part of a somewhat aggressive strategy to just finish the opponent. It can be part of a more controlling strategy to just stabilize. It really fits on both those axes, or just the general tempo value strategy. That's a ton of game pieces. 3 game pieces plus Scry 3, huge. On the other end, your deck, if it's white, you're probably going to want as many Spirited Companions as you can get. In particular, if you're black-white or white-green, because it has this enchantment creature type. So you can, maybe live the dream and bounce it back with geothermal commies, or maybe have it, proc for when enchantment comes into play types of cards. So, super strong. And we've seen, cards like Priest of Ancient Lore and AFR that were 2-1 and even gained you life when it drew you a card. Thing is, that cost 3 mana and didn't have the enchantment subtype. So Spirit Companion is just playing exceptionally well for all those reasons. It's just generating card advantage. Can block if you need to, can return to hand. If you can attack with this and ninjutsu it back to your hand and play it again, it's kind of like Virus Beetle, you were living the dream. It is being taken earlier than these other cards, but it is pretty comparable, again, over 60% win rate, and IW Doom Proof when drawn. of more than 7%. And of course, it's also good in opening hand, but because it's being bounced back to your hand, that's probably why this number is a little inflated. And these are probably both close to about 60%. But it just does so much. Again, you're going to see that the theme here is value, being on the board early, generating game pieces. So Moon Circuit Hacker. This is not Ninja of the Deep Shadows, but this is potentially better because it just ninjutsus in for 1 blue. Just blue, 2-1 coming at you. Which does help set up, doing this on turn 2. You played a Network Disruptor, and then you attacked with it, and you ninjutsu this in. And then maybe if you're lucky, on turn 2 you also played an Kamigawa Reckoner after the ninjutsu, just to set up some shenanigans in future turns. It's a big game right there. But because you can ninjutsu this in for just a blue, you have chances to do like double ninjutsu abilities, where let's say you ninjutsu in a Moon Snare Specialist to bounce your opponent's creature, and then with your last blue, you bring this back to your hand to put in a Moon Circuit Hacker, so you proc that ability of drawing a card, and you have the Specialist back in your hand to just do it the next turn. That can be so frustrating for an opponent, and I've done that enough times where opponents just concede on the spot when they see they're down on board because you bounced their creature, they're down on cards because you just drew a card, and you have the bounce in hand next turn. You can play pre-combat if they put down a big enough blocker, or you can just ninjutsu it in on whatever they block. It's just backbreaking. So this is a card that, along with Moonslayer Specialists and Network Disruptor, are probably your 1, 2, 3. Honestly, I would say you probably want the Network Disruptors more than these two because there are multiple ninjutsu cards that are high quality, particularly when you get into the uncommons as well, that you need an enable. You need something that will tap down a permanent so you can get in a good attack, or a flyer so you can get in a good attack. But this is one of the things you definitely want to ninjutsu in if you can. So we are seeing a higher pick rate than some others, probably because it looks like Ninja of the Deep Hours that people recognize, but your opening hand is around 59%. And this game drawn is probably a little lower because you're ninjutsu maybe back to your hand again. So they're both probably around 59 to 60%. And still a very good improvement with drawn of 6%. So again, this is just generating card advantage. During a good body at 2-1 for 1 mana, in theory, when you're ninjutsuing, or if you have to play it on turn 2, which you really don't want to do, you can at least do that so you stay, ahead on board, or at least on parity on board. And then if you need to bring it back your hand for another ninjutsu, just ninjutsu it back out that turn or the next turn. You're golden, you're fine. You can do that. So you won't see much removal here because so many of these creatures are value creatures that it doesn't make as much sense to kill it after it's already generated the benefit. That the exception is Twist and Embrace because a few reasons. One, this modifies your creature. So it's an aura that's on your creature that you've played. It's an enchantment, which means oftentimes you can either bounce it back to your hand with like a Geothermal Kami, or you can use a Season of Renewal to get it from your graveyard. So there's so many silly, sick things you can do with Twist and Embrace. And it also can pump up your creature. If you put it on a flyer, now they're chipping in for even more damage. If you put it on a ground creature that maybe had an unfavorable pack would have traded, now maybe it gets past that creature or trades with 2 creatures. So yeah, costing 4 mana is not ideal when almost everything else is costing 1, 2 mana. But that is all right. And yes, you can get blown out. They can kill your creature you're putting it on. But the really nice thing is there's not very much instant speed interaction. There's some stuff in red that's been underperforming. And then there's, a punch spell, in green, Master's Rebuke. But beyond that, we're not seeing too much. So it's tougher to get punished with Twist and Embrace as it would maybe be in other sets that we've seen. But still, we're seeing opening hand win rates that are lower and game drawn that are higher. But again, and this is balancing back to your hand. You're playing it again. This is probably closer to like a 60, 61%. But still a very strong card. I will say it probably is behind Kamigawa Reckoner and Virus Beetle in almost every deck. The Potential exception would be you might in black-green consider taking, a Twisted Embrace ahead of Virus Beetle. But if you have some ninjutsuers in black and green, you're probably going to take the Virus Beetle first and be happy about it. So, Modern Age, as a general rule, sagas are overperforming because the format is not hyper aggressive. You are having time to play a saga on two, and unless someone's going to ninjutsu something in, you're probably going to be all right. So this is a chance to find what you want, do some filtering, some looting, draw a card, discard a card, and it turns to a reasonable 2-3 body. This is a fine thing to play on 2. You'll see opening hand win rates, 61% versus game drawn, about 60%. So you're happy to place on 2 a lot of times and either get rid of lands you don't need or get rid of cards that are not fitting the strategy that you need to implement in that game to either find lands or find other cards. You are seeing a good improvement with drawn of 6.4%. So it's a card that's playing very well. And then the flying body's nice. Sometimes you'll even bring this back to your hand with a ninjutsu just to play it again to dig to the right cards. So green's first card, a generally innocuous 1/1 Death Toucher, but Fango Shigeki is doing so much. Again, enchantment creature type. So you're getting enchantment benefits. You can return it to your hand. You can get +1/+1 counters for cards that get those for enchantments. You can return it to the graveyard as an enchantment rather than a creature with season renewal. It's doing a ton. And then oftentimes this can hold back your opponent's attempts to ninjutsu something in, or their bigger creatures if they've established those, or it can attack in itself. And oftentimes, unless your opponent has a dinky creature they don't want anymore, they're not really looking to trade, so it might set up a favorable ninjutsu for you in green or maybe in black, or in blue if you're playing blue-green. But it does tend to do very well opening hand, and still holds up late in the game as well, this game drawn. IWD is not as good as the others. We do have a pretty big drop-off here from the 5s and up down to, right around 4 percentage points. Part of that is probably because green is not performing quite as well as, blue and black, and in some instances white. But there's so many good green commons that, they're all rising the ship of green. It's just maybe not as strong at this point. So speaking of other green commons, Jukai Preserver. This one looks like a 4/4/4, but it's so much more than that. You can use it to mess up combat with the channel, which is just so backbreaking for opponent when they think they're going to trade, and now you get a 2-for-1, and both the creatures live, and they're bigger now. Also, you can bring it back from the grave with Season Renewal because it's an enchantment. So you can also bring a creature back. You can just play it as a 3/3 and pump something else up with the +1/+1 counter. It's doing so much, and yet it costs 4 mana, which is probably why it's not higher up. If this thing costs 3 mana, let's say, and had the same channel ability, and was just a 2/2, same +1/+1 counter, it would probably go up, 2-3 percentage points, to be honest with you. But it's still playing very well, and it's not necessarily a pull into green. But if you're seeing these, later in the pick 5, maybe like pick 7, pick 8, or it's wheeling, it might be a signal that you could be in green. And if it plays well with your other cards, it can just be very strong. And then just last 2, Moonslayer Specialist. This has actually been my favorite compared to Moonstruck Attacker. It's just been so backbreaking for tempo that I've really enjoyed taking the first one of these over the first Moonstruck Attacker. But its numbers are a little lower, game drawn 61, game in hand 59, IWD 4.5, but it's still super strong. You're oftentimes playing this for 3, but even if you play it for 4, it's still a mana war, which is almost never a bad thing. Just tons of value, bounce a creature, and you get a creature on board. Big game there. And then finally, Geothermal Kami. This is a card that has been exceptionally overperforming. Flying Hot Tub is doing some work. The life gain this incidental is very nice, but being able to bounce back, your Spirited Companions, for example, your Twisted Embraces, even something cheap like a Fang of Shigeki that you'll replay is so nice. And then it's got a big enough body to where it can trade or maybe attack in favorably. So again, only 3, improvement when drawn, but we're getting good game drawn and good game in hand win rates. It's not an enchantment subtype, but it does still have the enchantment synergy, so you can fit these into your decks like your black greens and your green whites that want to be enchantment heavy. So those are the top 10, 11, 12 commons. But if we want to put it in perspective, let's look at when they're last seen, average last seen at, and then just their game in hand or drawn in game win rate. Again, this is just the first 5 or 6 days. To orient you to this graph, this is kind of your center line for which cards that are above it are probably being drafted later than they should be based on their win rates, because win rate is going up on the y-axis. And then you have your average last seen at on the x-axis. Cards that are below this are having lower win rates but are being taken earlier. So quick orientation. So you're going to see a lot of these underperformers are going to be removal spells, like Twist Embrace is right about where it probably should be. It's right on this line. But Intercessor's Arrest is unimportant. It's winning under 60%, but being drafted, before 3.5, like it's a card that should be winning 60+%. Same with Kami's Flare. Same with Voltage Surge. Same with Lethal Exploit. Same with Wanderer's Intervention. So a lot of these are just underperforming because they're 1-for-1 removal spells. And yeah, costing 1 or 2 mana can be alright, and you still need to have some of these in your deck, but you don't need to be picking these pick 1, pick 2, pick 3 oftentimes. Conversely, we're seeing cards like Network Disruptor that's, 62, 63%, but being drafted, between pick 5 and 6, average last seen at, where it probably should be closer to pick, 1, 2, 3, 4. Virus Beetle, Keeper Raid Reckoner, Moon Circuit Hacker, Moonstare Specialist, even higher on game and drawn win rate. Spirited Companion, Imperial Oath, super undervalued. Season Renewal, undervalued as well. These win rates, but being drafted so late. Geothermal Kami, Searchlight Companion. So it's just something you can do, to gain perspective on, maybe colors that are being underdrafted. We see so many green cards here and so many blue cards that are just being drafted way too late based on their win percentages. Even some black cards, maybe that's the indication that these are underdrafted colors at this point. And it's a place where you can maybe gain an edge. Whereas you'll see a lot of red cards and even a good number of white cards that are maybe being drafted too early. So at this point, since maybe Sultai colors are the place to be, at least on the commons. So I hope this has been helpful, and feel free to provide your perspective if you have different opinions.